And look out for the release of the Cracks and Pomo zine coming out in mid-June. To get a copy or to make a contribution to our funds, DM at Cracks and Pomo. So, welcome back to the Cracks in Postmodernity. Today we have Danko of the Dankdeleuze meme page. Danko, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to finally be here.
Yes, yes. After a long await, we are here now. We're going to be discussing Pasolini's film Salo, or 120 Days in Sodom. But before we do that, Danko, tell us, for those who aren't familiar, tell us a little bit about your interests, the kinds of stuff you post on your page, all that good stuff.
Sure. Well, I studied comparative literature and philosophy in college, but otherwise, I spend most of my time shit posting these days. So the meme page focuses on those topics themselves, as well as literature, art, music. I do a lot of cooking on there for some reason, just any kind of creative or humanistic kind of inquiry or experience. Mostly making the same joke about eggs over and over again, uh, but yeah, so despite the Deleuze name, though he's a big part of my focus, I would say that the page probably has a little bit more to do with I don't know, the likes of Bataille, Whitehead, folks of that sort. But Deleuze always rears his ugly head, and so do his monstrous young.
So, for people who have never read Deleuze, can you tell us like what are some of the main ideas that he's known for?
Well, he's kind of a pure metaphysician, right? It's this focus on looking at the nitty gritty details of what make up everything. And a couple of the real notable ideas would be kind of this post psychoanalytic take on schizophrenia and its application to things like capitalism. So, just the idea of trying to find through this kind of inundation of exploratory experience, ways to remove ourselves from these ossified structures that constantly are kind of tormenting us, or worse yet, not even the ossified structures, but the constantly rebuilt structures that capitalism kind of enforces on us as it melts away preceding culture, but kind of using that and weaponizing it in order to escape into some kind of future that might actually be better for us. Otherwise, a lot of focus on literature, a lot of focus on the arts. He does a lot of commentaries, which are extremely loose a lot of the time on various philosophers, be it Spinoza or Wittgenstein or Nietzsche or anyone. So he really kind of journeys around a lot. He takes that schizophrenic walk and kind of revitalizes and redescribes a lot of preceding thinkers. And yeah, other than that, I guess real notable ideas would be things like the body without organs, the just the notion of deterritorialization, both of which fit into what I ended up mentioning before, which is this removal from or wandering away from or recapitulation and any one of many versions of those things of the way that our lives and ways of thinking are structured in order to reorganize them into new potentials that we weren't aware of before.
Hmm. So, would
And
you?
shitting on Freud.
Well, yeah, there's that too. You would you consider him a post-structuralist? Is that a fair way to
Yeah,
categorize him?
I would say so. But I would say that most of uh, the most rewarding readings of Deleuze are going to be Deleuzean in the sense that they don't care much about what he thought and more just what you're able to do with his tools. But yeah, he himself I would describe as a post-structuralist.
Because from the little that I do understand, I think there is a clear distinction between him and the main post-structuralists like Foucault and Derrida, the ones who
Mhm.
have the biggest influence, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say so. But he always was, and kind of more free form than a lot of them, and certainly someone that still fits into this bizarre kind of Pomo version of Marxism or something approximating it, but still kind of uh, trying never to get too stuck in one place. I mean, there's most of the difference there. I would say is a bit nuanced and kind of unhelpfully so, and unless we want to spend forever on the question. But I mean, I would say that his type of thinking, be it one that is focused more on the metaphysics of things rather than strictly politics and always politics and always culture and kind of redefining identity and focusing on identity, it's a tool set that's more applicable to people kind of all over the political spectrum. Whereas with thought by Derrida or Foucault, while you can still use it on the left or the right, there's definitely more of a pointed slant in one direction or the other. You're never going to have, unless we're just talking about a prison guard, a kind of a Foucauldian right winger, as far as I can imagine in the moment. But you can make Nick Land appear out of the works of Deleuze. Then there's also the kind of reconsideration of psychoanalysis and the intention of not just fighting it and in the kind of totalitarian philosophy that goes along with it, but an interest in turning it in on itself and overcomplicating it, and then using it in order to describe itself, and it becomes very kind of meta and nightmarish and kind of self-proliferating. So I would say that a lot of them really have these discrete political projects that they want to focus on, and they really do focus on things like the importance of identity and how that kind of over determines who someone is and all sorts of things. But that doesn't seem to come up quite as much for Deleuze, and when it does, it's in a way that can be kind of more malleable and turned into something far more bizarre.
Okay, so Deleuze is clearly a complex figure, but it's interesting how like people can take his ideas into so many different directions. Hard to kind of be boxed in.
Yeah,
Um,
and just the fact that, I mean, the thing that really interests me about him fundamentally, whereas a lot of the other post-structuralists and postmodernists don't, is politics is interesting and it's important, but the fact that he focuses so much on concepts like time and substance and these more kind of ancient philosophical notions, and then tries to modernize and postmodernize all of these notions and turn them into new, more interesting versions of those old questions, rather than throwing them out entirely, as is kind of the standard, I think, with most metaphysics, unless you're looking at kind of contemporary Heideggerians or something like that. It's someone that's willing to ask questions about capitalism while also saying something interesting about the metaphysics of time is I think going to need to be put into a different category than someone like Foucault is.
yeah, no, because I think like when you look at what Foucault is doing, he's collapsing these metaphysical categories, or at least the role that they play in our critique
Mm.
of society. And I think what ends up happening with the mainstream post-structuralists is like, because they reduce everything to power and then in turn to economics, you really flatten the critique. Like, and it's very difficult to do much with that kind of materialism. But that brings us to what we're talking about today, Pasolini, who, for those who aren't familiar, Italian artist, filmmaker, writer, poet, who was a Marxist, but not a very conventional one. He had some unorthodox views, I think, because of this, because he had this consciousness of the role of the metaphysical. But he put out this film based on Marquis de Sade's 120 Days in Sodom. In what year was this? This was 1975, I believe. And yeah, it was very controversial. People throwing up in the aisles of the theater, people running out screaming and cursing, got in a lot of trouble. Um, so yeah, how did you first come upon this film?
So the way I first came across it was many years ago, when I was, I want to say, a freshman in high school. And I was a big fan of horror movies, and I wanted to watch all of the real edgy films. So we're talking Cannibal Holocaust, things like that. And I had heard through the grapevine that this was a terrifying, transgressive, interesting film. So I finally ended up watching it, this old VHS that, which was pretty common at that point in time, that people would just kind of pass these back and forth, no label, clearly had been copied off of something. And I ended up watching it. And while the film was and is really striking, and certainly ends up depicting a lot of extremely unpleasant activity, it was surprising to me how I wouldn't even say tame, but how sterilized a lot of the most graphic stuff is, right?
Mhm.
Uh, at least in comparison to a lot of this other, gore films and stuff like that, right? And I think the first part of that is simply because it's not schlock, right? This is a very well made film by a very well respected and rightfully so director who is focused on making a piece of art that also has political commentary, uh, and actual commentary. We're not talking about like the whoever the fuck it was that ended up writing Serbian film and then applied political commentary to it afterwards, kind of thing. But the other part of it, apart from it being artful and thoughtful instead of just reveling constantly in the torment, is the fact that I think that there is an intention, apart from a couple notable shots of fecal matter or this or that, that that it's really quite intentional that everything is put at a distance, and everything is still horrible, and mortifying, but is placed in these very kind of obeying a lot of the rules of thirds, kind of the traditional filmmaking kind of standards, and put to extremes in a lot of shots, but also placed at literal and then kind of emotional distance. Like you don't even know the backstories apart from like the relationship of the daughters to the four libertines. You don't really know the backstories of really anyone in this film. You're never given a reason to feel anything about them apart from the fact that they are just fundamentally human beings. And so the film, in all of its grotesquerie, never gets as mortifying as it could be, and I think on purpose. So that was striking to me back then, even when I was in high school. I didn't know why it was like that, but I've been able to give it some thought since then.
But what do you think ultimately? Like, what is he trying to do with this film? Because people debate, they have many different interpretations. But ultimately, like, what do you say? What is he? What is the point?
So I think there are a few correct or correct-ish answers to that. But one of the most important lines in the entire film, and I don't remember if this is being quoted from Marquis de Sade's work or not, so I'm not sure where exactly it comes from. But it's something to the tune of the limit of love or desire is always needing an accomplice, and then you always have to be executioner both and victim, right?
Mhm.
And I feel like the notion of the film is to produce a depiction of consumption, right? Uh, Literal and otherwise. So, people producing shit and then having to eat it, and having to enjoy it. And then once you've produced that metaphor, forcing people to sit down with it and then giving them the opportunity to not enjoy it, right? To appreciate it for what it is, but to still find it kind of despicable and to leave feeling more or less empty. Um, Whereas we're so often encouraged to enjoy things which have no real enjoyable attributes to them, the things that are hyper palatable, things that are soul sucking, and things that are shit. We're encouraged to eat shit all the time and to pretend that it has some kind of significant and positive effect on us, the McDonald's I'm loving it kind of thing. But this film, it kind of allows for a paradox with that, where we watch in wonder as all of this occurs, and still enjoy it in a way if you're someone that likes film, and otherwise to leave kind of dissatisfied and repelled, but not necessarily regretting what's just happened,
Yeah.
which is something we don't have the opportunity to do very often.
Now, have you read any of 120 Days in Sodom by the Sod?
Ages ago, but only bits,
Well, it's hard to remember the whole thing. That's
right. I mean, you only have like the first 30 days to begin with, and then the rest is half written or not written at all. And then even that is, yeah, yeah. So
yeah, it's hard to
sort of.
say. Like it's yeah, I mean, obviously a pretty twisted guy, but he was onto something. And I think Pasolini recognized that, and that's part of why he decided to use it for this film. But I'm interested also to hear, so like there's definitely this critique of consumerism, how it renders everything very empty and vacuous. We end up consuming shit basically. Um, and people are scandalized because obviously it's disgusting to look at people eating like actual poop. But again, it's a provocation to ask, like, how does this hold up a mirror to what
Mhm.
we all are living, and there's you as you were mentioning before we started recording, like there's this element of critique about spectatorship, how consumerism kind of turns us into spectators. And that's it's another idea that we see in a couple of the post-structuralist postmodern philosophers. But can you say a little more about that? Like what does it mean that we become spectators, and how does that get critiqued in the film?
Right. I mean, if you think of all of the moments, or all of the ones that I can think of in the film where they comment positively on things,
Mhm.
it's moments when they're talking or singing about how all of the best young men lie dead under the earth, or just this idea that uh, everything they love is something that they're annihilating, right?
Yeah.
And or have annihilated even before the moment of mentioning it. And so there's this constant realization, I think, that whatever is viewable is something which is itself repulsive, and can't be placed at that same sacred height, right? um as makes sense when you consider the fact that what is the sacred. It's something which is sacrificed. Sacrifice is the production of sacred things. You think about Christ or otherwise. That's kind of the formula here. And so when we're talking about spectatorship in this film, you're talking about viewing something, and by viewing, making it grotesque, making it less than, and kind of defining it as an object for your spectatorship and pleasure. And that only the things which you cannot see are the things that have genuine value. There's only one exception to that I can think of, which is, I believe it's the scene, the scene that's going to come up over and over again. It's the shit eating at the banquet, and I forget which one of the libertines says it, but mentions that this one of the slaves, their deft gesticulations were like a code which cannot be transgressed, and they're kind of in awe at that. And and the thing I think which allows that form of spectatorship, just watching this person's body kind of writhe around, which allows it to be beautiful or to be God forbid, holy or anything like that to them, is because of the fact that it exists beyond the limit of verbal communication. And so it's something which exists to be spectated upon, but can't then be spoken into reality, right? And and so yeah, I think that spectatorship on its own. Sorry to be so verbose about this, but spectatorship in this film is just a way of making something repulsive or identifying it as repulsive, and those things which can't be described, those things that exist at or beyond limits, or those things which have already been lost, are the only things that maintain any goodness, and can't be spectated.
Yeah, and so this is something I wrote about recently, and I wrote an article for Nylon about the artist Bad Bunny's his career, which definitely you see how this concept of spectatorship really takes over in popular culture. And this is something that Pasolini mentioned, that he once said that his greatest fear was not the government and fascism, but the power of pop culture. And you see with a lot of these celebrities how um, they really just captivate the attention of the public for doing the most mundane and empty things.
Sure.
Because we can't stop talking about these people, but when we stop and ask, like, okay, but what substance of this has? Like, why is this worth us paying attention to and talking about? Like, you see that there is a dictatorship of spectatorship, we could say. Um, and that leads to this, the critique or the interest that I have, I guess, in Salo is that, Pasolini's a Marxist. He's I guess we could say a lapsed Catholic. He says he's an atheist, but then towards the end of his life, he recognizes he has this curiosity about religion and this sense of the sacred, which obviously Marxism has a hard time kind of wrapping its head around. But he puts out this rendering of the gospel according to Matthew as an expression of his kind of religious search. But I think in Salo we see that, like, consumer capitalism really sucks out any sense of the sacred because everything is commodified. So the fact that they're eating shit, it's to say that, like, there's nothing has real value anymore because there's nothing absolute. There is no deity. There's no universal entity, absolute entity that transcends, the temporal. Um, and especially like the human person totally loses their dignity if there is no tie to something eternal, that, like, again, like, we become shit because all we eat is shit. But then the other thing that we end up seeing is that he starts to see that Marxism, it's limited because of its materialist commitments, that it doesn't really give space for the metaphysical to enter in. And without the metaphysical, it's really hard to overturn this death of the sacred that comes with capitalism. So I don't know, especially for you having, being connected to Deleuze and understanding metaphysics. What are your thoughts about that? Like, what would you say about his critique on this loss of something sacred or something eternal under capitalism?
Yeah, I mean, so what I prefer to Marxism would be something like Bataille's general economy, right? Which always necessarily terminates, and it's not only the termination but also the motor of the whole system, but it terminates in the production and destruction of excess, right?
Mhm.
So this excess or the sacrificial quantity, this accursed quantity, is the thing that all of this shit happens for, right? So I think that that kind of critique of Marxism, while I mean that it's there's an issue here, right? Because I don't think that you're wrong in saying that, but I would point out just the fact that the underlying notion behind why Marxist critique matters is because the alienation of each individual within the capitalist system is so great as to remove their ability to be spiritual or to have any kind of real connection to something other than having everything extracted from them, right?
Mhm.
So the Marxist issue connected to that is, as you're kind of gesturing towards, which is that it doubles down on trying to reanalyze how capital works and the machinery of it, and leaves us just deeper in it. It's the old kind of tongue in cheek, but maybe more accurate than we'd like. The Marxists read Marx and capitalists understand Marx kind of result, where you just get sucked up in that machinery, and then it doesn't do much to fix your spiritual alienation and abandonment.
Mhm.
But I do think that the yeah, I mean, it's extremely clear to me that much of the idea of the film, though it doesn't come up very often, it's intense when it does come up. Much of the point of this film is to point out the fact that so much of this overcommodification, so much of the kind of homogenization of politics into these camps, et cetera, only serves to remove the life from human life, right? Remove the sacred from human life. And the two moments that really stand out to me with that are Number one, the most obvious one, we have one of the uh, one of the women sitting in a barrel of her own feces. I have to and would like to assume it's hers, but it's almost definitely everyone else's. Now that I think about it, but she's sitting in this barrel of shit, and says the whole Lord, why have you forsaken us?
Yeah.
And so that's a pretty heavy-handed gesture. But the other one that I think is really salient is uh, I think it's Senora Castelli that says it. One of the readers, but she says when she's talking about these insane murder machines that like flay the flesh off of people's bodies, which can only make you think of the Industrial Revolution and machines of that sort, or that's what it makes me think of. um, she ends up saying it's not enough to kill the same person over and over. It's much more recommended to kill as many beings as possible. And that had kind of religious intonation to me, right? Where it's not enough to simply have, the Christ or whatever your sacred thing is, whatever your sacrifice is, die over and over for you. That stops being satisfying when you need to kind of spread it out and share it with everyone and then extract from those people. You have to just turn the entire machinery of the world against those individuals and remove their remove their lives that way. So um, and really, I mean, what's more fundamental to Marxist analysis than this idea of atomization, right? Alienation through atomization, and the same thing occurs with something like the spiritual life, be it religious or otherwise, where the more that we depend upon each individual as having their own kind of not discrete, but discrete spirituality, the more you lose out on some genuine sacred thing that can be shared between people and actually bond culture into producing something meaningful.
Yeah, and the Marx's idea about the commodity fetishism. And we had Bill Kavanaugh, who's a theologian, on here maybe like a year ago, and one of the things that he was saying about that section of Das Kapital is that, again, despite Marx's materialist commitments, you can see that he's saying the way that we fetishize the commodity, the way that we kind of worship brand names, like I don't know, like whether it's having the Nike swoosh on one's shoes or on their shirt, or like if you think about Supreme, that like a white T-shirt that has Supreme on it is like $200. Like this has filled in that spiritual vacuum. Like this is it's like the divine, as he said, has migrated, or the sacred has migrated to the commodity. But again, it's not sacred in itself, so it ends up becoming shit. So, that's this recurring theme that we see in the film. Um, I know, but I did want to ask you, since you've mentioned Bataille before, say a little bit more about what you think he would make of the film. Like what else? What other connection can you make there?
Yeah, I mean, to just kind of repeat what I've said to start. The motor of any society, regardless of its structures otherwise, is ultimately to produce some form of excess, right? Be it that through a potlatch, or be that through excess value for shareholders, or something else. So that's kind of a fundamental idea in terms of his economics, which are of course important to this film. But in addition, so many of the things that I've said already come more or less from Bataille, right? Including this notion of spectatorship, this idea that by the purpose of viewing something as beautiful, oftentimes as part of this connection to a production of excess, and again, this excess which needs to be sacrificed or destroyed, made imminent with the world, right? Surrendered to it, is on the optimistic end to sacrifice it in kind of a holy rite, or to destroy it entirely by debasing it. And there's this understanding that everything that's beautiful kind of connects to this wider kind of like the energy web that you hear about in the life sciences, that feeds into it, from the rest of the world, and that web of energy or value almost necessarily comes from debased sources. And so any beautiful thing that you see, which is not sacrificed or made immanent with the world, anything that kind of rises up from the world or is made independent from it, is something that can only be beautiful by being repulsive in some other right. So I do see a lot of that kind of already present in this work. That and I would say that there's a and this isn't really an intellectual response, but this film does give me a feeling even now that I've only experienced with one other piece of art, being Blue of Noon by Bataille, which is this sense of kind of dreamlike dread, right? Just this feeling that what is being experienced is awful, but it's removed and it's surreal, but only to the degree that it's still, you're not sure if it's meant to be surreal, right? If it's meant to be as extreme as it is, because if you compare that to something like Story of the Eye by Bataille, that's supposed to be insane, right?
Yeah.
It's supposed to be absolutely just bonkers. But Blue of Noon, while it does have some really extreme kind of components, mostly feels like you're being besieged by something on the outside, and something which isn't there, if that makes any sense. Because that's the feeling that I get from this film is, and I think the way to intellectually state it would be that it's one of the few expressions of one of the few artistic expressions of genuine nihilism. Not saying that Pasolini is nihilist. I don't think it is at all. But the feeling of nihilism, that the world outside of this place doesn't exist, and that's the thing that's encroaching. Which I think again kind of gives an opportunity for another religious reading of this, which is that the absolute void of anything notable, be that just cultural death or be that the notion of a death without afterlife or anything like that, needs to be confronted in this most dreadful possible world, right? So this is the place where you have to find the answer, and this is a place that doesn't have anything good to give you, and yet you still have to find some kind of I wouldn't want to be as heavy-handed as to say salvation, but maybe that's the only correct word for it.
Well, yeah, I mean, if not salvation, something that yeah, I mean, in a sense, there's a need to be saved. There's a need to be saved from the shit, ultimately. So no, I mean, before we wrap things up, I wanted to ask, so it's however many years, what, like 40, 50 something years later, what do you think the film has to offer to audiences today? Like, how is it relevant to what's going on in our world at this point?
It gives you an opportunity, like I kind of pointed out at the beginning, to view something and appreciate it without enjoying it. Um, there are a lot of beautiful parts of the film. There are a lot of things that I do find enjoyable. I do like watching the film, but mostly I like to watch it because of the way that I feel afterwards.
Mhm.
But you are inundated constantly with media that only has the purpose of catching attention and maintaining it for as long as possible and making you think that you're enjoying it so that you can feel awful about it afterwards.
Yeah.
And I think with the correct viewing, this type of media and media like Blue of Noon gives you the opportunity to struggle through something, to not necessarily find it joyous or even captivating. At points, this movie is downright boring for myself and others that I've spoken to. It's disgusting. It's uncomfortable, but it's rewarding in spite of and because of that. And works as this kind of beautiful meta commentary on how awful most of what you're consuming pretending you enjoy is, including things like meme pages. So that's my primary takeaway.
Yes, that's a valid point. Awesome. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, for me, first of all, I have to say, it is hard to watch. It's not for the faint of heart. Not everyone will be able to handle it, but I do think if you find yourself capable of watching it, yeah, like it does make us ask these really important questions about the conditions we're living in, primarily about how we become consumers, we become spectators, but also what is capable of saving us, like what can take us out of this shit. um I think, again, the fact that it's so dramatic, it's so grotesque, it forces us to reckon with the fact that simplistic answers are not going to save us from it. Like there has to be something comprehensive. There has to be something like, I don't know, real, that has real substance. So yeah, it's gross, it's disgusting, but it does force us to ask these essential questions. So I would say watch it if you have the stomach for it. If not, then read something about it. But yeah, so before we go, Danko, anything that you want to plug for listeners?
Yeah. So apart from the meme page, so Dankdeleuze on Instagram, the more important thing that I'd like to plug is I do teach a writing workshop every Saturday. That's through Zoom. You can find that on Patreon. It's patreon.com/Trincata, which is Truncata. What we do is every week we read an essay or two, some poetry, look at some media, be it a film or some images, whatever. And we do some writing exercises. We just talk about the readings. We talk about philosophy and literature otherwise. And yeah, it's a good time. So I'd invite everyone to go check that out. And otherwise, that's it for me.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Danko. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.